My name is David Greenberg. I want to welcome everyone to our teleseminar today. The topic is public speaking. Get A's, not Z's. Our expert guest is my colleague and friend, Milo Shapiro. Let me tell you a little bit about Milo. In 2000, after 15 years in information technology, Milo Shapiro took his then 10-year passion for improvisation into business, applying the fundamentals of improvisation to communication skills, teamwork, and innovation. He has brought his work to organizations like the U.S. Marine Corps, the Union Bank of California, Sempra Energy, and Computer Sciences Corporation, just to name a few of his very impressive clients. As a professional keynote speaker, Milo has honed his knowledge of platform skills. He shares his knowledge with others through classes, coaching, and speeches about presentation skills. Through his company, Improv Ventures, and its public speaking division called Public Dynamics, Milo helps individuals become more vibrant in front of groups, organize and optimize their material, and make their storytelling more powerful. Milo serves on the local board of the National Speakers Association. In support of his community, he is also part of another duo that performs in schools and teaches kids about theater and compassionate communication. His newest book is called Public Speaking, Get A's, Not Z's. And we'll put a link on our website, davidgreenberg.com, so you can get that book after listening to the teleseminar. And I will tell you, I have read that book. It is an extremely unusual book, a very well-written book, and unusual in the format, that it's extraordinarily easy to read and great content. We'll talk more about that later. So let me just say, you're going to be impressed by Milo, and if you want more information about having him work with you personally or your group, you can contact us at davidgreenberg.com, and we'll provide more information at the end of our program. So, Milo, welcome.
Thank you. That was fun to listen to.
As if you wrote it.
No, you did a really nice job on it. I just kicked back and listened.
Thank you. Are you ready to get started?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Well, that's what we're here for. So let me just start with the first question that I ask just about everybody who we interview. And the first one is, can you tell our listeners how you came to be a coach on this topic of public speaking?
Sure, and if you had told me a number of years back that I was going to be, I just would have looked at you funny. That was never part of the original plan when I left the information technology. I'm going to skip the big part of the story, how I became a motivational speaker, but I was out doing motivational speaking, and one time when I spoke to a group, someone came up to me afterwards and said, would you be willing to come to our company and do a class in public speaking? And I said, well, sure, that would be fun. That would be kind of interesting. And then it started happening more. I guess as I got better, I started having people come up to me and saying, could you work with me? Could you work with our people? Would you be willing to run a class? Would you work one-on-one? And so I said, gosh, it keeps happening. I guess I should think about creating a coaching business around it. And then I put it on my website, and with the miracle of the Internet, started getting calls from people I'd never seen before. And all of a sudden, this new side of my business took off, and I discovered I just loved doing it. It was really exciting and fun to watch people one-on-one. When you're doing motivational speaking, you don't often get to spend a lot of time with people beyond the hour you're with them. But with coaching, I got to watch the progress people made, and it was just so much fun.
Yeah, it's a great rewarding experience to see people grow from the coaching, isn't it?
Exactly, and then tying in the work that I have in the background with improvisation, we make the coaching sessions as much fun as we can in the process of the learning.
I know we're going to go off on a tangent just for a moment, but let's do that. Tell people just a little bit about what improvisation is, in case there's some people out here who are listening. We got an international audience. Just maybe give us a little nutshell of what is improv?
Sure. Well, in terms of performance, what improv is, and the quickest way to it is if someone has ever seen either the American or British version of the show, Whose Line Is It Anyway? That is a show that shows improvisation. Improvisation is creating scenes and stories without any script in advance based on suggestions from the audience. But if you never perform anything with improv at all, there are still fun classes. And initially I took classes. It led to performance. And one of the things I noticed in classes with improvisation was that the people there were getting better at listening skills and building on each other's ideas, nonverbal communication, taking something that wasn't going the way they thought it would and finding the way to make it work, all things that related to how we can handle ourselves better in business and in communication in general. So as I started doing that more, I found that I was a better speaker. I was better at communication in the office, better at mediating situations, adapting to change. It's a wonderful training ground, improv, for just all kinds of things in life.
Great. Now, was there ever a time that you were not such a good speaker? Because I know some of our listeners, we probably have people who are very nervous about speaking, some people who are in the middle of the spectrum, and some people who just want to fine-tune. Where have you been in your career and in your speaking skills?
Right. It's an ongoing question, are speakers born or bred? And I think it goes both ways. So the question for me, I think I was always a pretty good speaker. I mean, I didn't have any real issues around being able to get up in front of a group. I mean, I got nervous like everybody else, no question about that. But I don't think I was someone who stumbled a lot over their words. I could get my eyes off the page a little bit if I practiced. So I probably started out with a good core set of strengths to be able to build on. And some people do and some people don't, but everyone can improve by knowing what steps to take.
And you do believe that, as I do too. Everybody can get better with this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've seen people who are just both horrified to be up there and really showing no skill set at doing it, and seen them get to the point where they did really nice work. Are they getting out there to the point where they're ready to do this public speaking professionally circuit? Not necessarily, but they're so far from where they started that they're thrilled, and that met their needs. It's more about finding out what their needs are and meeting them than making them the best speaker ever.
Great. So let's talk about the importance of learning to be a very effective presenter. Why is it so important for people to learn and maybe even master this skill?
Sure. I mean, it shows up in so many different ways. The opportunity to get up and speak in front of a group doesn't always come up for people on a frequent basis. But when it does, to handle it with grace really can impress people. And the same skills that work well in speaking to a group of 200 people or 30 people are some of the same skills you're going to draw on one-on-one in a job interview, or walking into someone's cubicle to say, I need to talk to you about something. So the ability to make your point in a way that's clear, interesting, and memorable is going to be powerful no matter what aspect of your life you apply it to. And you can take it out of the business world as well, to be able to deal with it in social situations, in family situations, in dealing with kids. When I've worked with kids, sometimes really making it clear what I need and why in a very few words, as long as I'm going to hold their attention.
Great. Okay, well, now everyone has their strengths and their weaknesses or opportunities as a speaker, but is there some general advice that you find yourself giving to others that's fairly universal?
I think if there's one thing that everyone can do better and do more of, even more so than better, is to incorporate stories more into their work. Okay. You can throw a lot of data at people in the process of trying to explain something, a lot of pie charts and a lot of history, but people don't hold that, they don't retain it, and they don't relate to it. By contrast, if you tell a story that really has an interesting catch to it, that has people wanting to know what's going to happen, and the moral of that story relates to what point you wanted to get across to them, that will stay with them for years to come. For instance, David, if I were to ask you the story of the boy who cried wolf, what's the moral of that story?
You better be careful when you cry wolf, because you better mean it, or people aren't going to pay attention. Right.
If we tell lies, people aren't going to believe us. Now, when's the last time you read that story, David?
I probably in elementary school, first, second grade.
So we're going back, I don't know exactly how old you were, going back a ways.
About 20 good years.
And so, okay, I'll leave you on that one. And so, but that's the point, is the story stays with us. If someone had told you a whole lot of different ways and reasons why we shouldn't lie, it probably would have gone in one ear and out the other. So in telling better and more stories from the platform, we're going to make a stronger impression on our audience. And anyone can do that.
And would part of the reason that we remember these stories be that they're also visual?
Absolutely, because a lot of the people in your audience are visual learners. Something like 60% of the people in any group are going to learn more visually than they are just by words or just by what they feel. And since there's only so much we can do, although there is a lot we can do, but in just speaking, there's only so much we can do visually, what we can do is we can paint imagery in people's minds so they're watching the movie in their head, and we're creating that sense of visual learning.
Is that better than a PowerPoint slide filled with text?
When you said filled with text, then the answer
he
is yes.
asked sarcastically.
Yeah, knowing very well the answer. Yeah, well, that's unfortunately one of the things people do is they feel like if I just put lots of text up there, I'll know what to say because I can keep reading it to them. And unfortunately, people start checking out because they start thinking, I could just be reading this. If all he's going to do is read his slides to me, why are we having him speak to us? So if you're going to use PowerPoint, we can talk more about that later, but if you are going to, be sure it's very visual. And have your own way of getting the words across to them to match the pictures, rather.
Okay, great. So storytelling is one of the things that we really all could continue to improve because of its impact. How do I get stories? I hear people tell me all the time, I don't have any stories. You and I know that's just not the case. But
right.
Give our listeners some advice. What do they do for those who don't feel that they have any good stories?
It can be such a small thing, and it's really about how you look at what goes on around you. For instance, there's a chapter in my other book where I was recounting a story to my friend Jordan, as the same story that my friend Robert had been there with me through. And later on, Robert said to me, I never would have thought to tell anyone that story. And I thought he was saying that it was boring. He said, no, not that it was boring. It just didn't seem important in the moment. But listening to you tell the story, suddenly I realized, wow, there was something to that, and there was a lesson you learned, and you brought out all the imagery. I had forgotten that the woman had big bags of cat food that she was lugging around. It was all part of the story once I told it. So there's always stuff going on around us. A lot of times, too, we feel we have to be big and monumental. We have to have Abraham Lincoln in a story for it to matter. Right. Actually, something that happened between you and the cashier at the supermarket might be just as important and significant in proving the point you want. So it's just something that people can relate to. The more human your story, the more personal your story, the better. Because so many of us have heard the stories that get battered around a lot on the stage, but nobody knows what happened between you and the mail lady yesterday.
Right. Good point. So we just have to be aware of the stories that are out there and keep that mindset.
Right. And also, if you have a story, something that's come up, something that ends up coming up at parties, I had this crazy uncle so-and-so, then look at the story and say, what are the different things one could learn from that? Because I have a few stories I use in different speeches to prove different points. All I have to do is change the perspective and say, what did this person learn? What did that person learn? What was the humor in that moment? And the same story might actually have 4 or 5 different lessons, just told slightly differently, not changing the facts, just altering the point of view of how it's told.
Great. And, Milo, something you've just reminded me of when you said we don't know what happened between you and the cashier, that instantly reminded me of a story about me and the cashier. So it seems like listening to other people's stories, what may jog our own memories, just like when we hear a joke, it often jogs our memory of a joke.
That's what I was going to say. If you asked me to tell you 10 jokes, after the third or fourth one, I couldn't think of another one. But you get 10 people in a room sharing jokes, and I'll be telling jokes for hours because one reminds you of another, and it just keeps going. The other thing you can do is just start looking at different topics. Look at different people in your life. Look at places you've been. If you look at different key things, just come up with key words. What's something that relates to the mail? What's something that relates to food? And something is bound to come up for you. And it may not seem that important, but jot them down because you never know when that story is going to turn out to be useful later on. I know some speakers who keep card files and computer files. Anytime they think, this story could be good for something.
Right.
You never know. Whenever something goes wrong, I think, there's another keynote story, so I try and make the best of it that way.
Exactly, and I know you have another book coming out soon called The Worst Days Make the Best Stories. And isn't
right,
that
and it's so true because it's more fun to learn from somebody else's disasters than your own, believe me.
Right. All right, I got one more question about stories. If I'm a salesperson, I've heard salespeople say, well, I'm not going to waste the customer's time by telling him or her a story. I got to get to the point, the benefits, which certainly there's great value in that. Can you use stories as a salesperson?
Yeah, I would say tell shorter stories. I think find a way to get to the crux of the story quickly, but I think that's more true than in sales and almost any place else. So how many times have you known that you've left someplace with a bag full of stuff and you realize you bought the salesperson because you really just ended up liking her, or she made you laugh, or something she said about the product really made you think, wow, if it made a difference for her, I like the way he felt when he was explaining that. And so I think that it's still just as true. It's, of course, if you've got 10 seconds of somebody's time as they're passing by, that's probably not going to be your chance to say, hey, can I tell you about my grandmother? But
right.
but within a context, if you can get a story across in 30 or 40 seconds, as compared to just talking more and more about the product, a good story that ends with why this product is great is going to make more of an impact on people, I think.
Excellent. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about the framework of a speech. Now, Toastmasters is a professional club that has been helping people develop their speaking abilities for nearly a century. I was a member, you were a member, and great organization, but I also understand that you differ in how you recommend framing a speech. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And again, nothing wrong with Toastmasters. I think it's a great program. I wouldn't talk anyone out of it. But one of the cruxes they use, and I've seen this in other people's books as well on the topic of how to put together a speech, they use something it's just a great standard that's been out there forever, and it says the 3 parts of any speech are tell them what you're going to tell them what you've got to tell them. David, tell me the last part. You know it.
Tell them what you told them.
Tell them what you told them. And I think that is a really good, simple format for an okay speech.
Yeah, it's a good foundation.
Yeah, it's based on that concept we had back in elementary school of an introduction, 3 supporting paragraphs, and a conclusion. And generally your teacher didn't have any idea how to tell you exactly what to put in that conclusion. Tell them what you told them, because what else are you going to do? It's not really an interesting way to put together a program, though, because there isn't much about it to grab you. Right. So I use a 4-step approach that I actually think even beginners can use, and they'll just get better with it instead of having to transition into it later. So let me talk about the 4 steps in mine. I'm going to spit them out quickly, and then I'll go over them. The 4 are the capture, the transition, the body, and the capper. So from the beginning, the capture. First thing you want to do is capture their attention, and this is a great place to use a story. Tell something that's going to make the audience go, who is this person? What is she about? Why is she telling us this? I'm with her. I'll listen to a story. Where is this going? A story that in some way is going to relate to what it is you're there to talk about that day. It might not seem so in the first minute, but if you're talking for half an hour, you can go a minute, 90 seconds without really hitting into the crux.
Right.
Yet. Then comes the transition, something about that story that gives you a chance to explain why did you tell that story, how does it lead into what we're talking about today, so that you get that, that's why he told that. Okay, I'm with him. He's still been interesting. I'm still with him. Now I want to hear the body of this because he's got my attention. Right. Then comes the body. This is one place where we absolutely agree. Tell them what you're there to tell them. So that's probably going to be a big chunk of your speech. But if I'm speaking for an hour, I could spend 5 minutes on the opening and the transition with the capture and the transition, because I have an hour to speak. So you factor that in. Using in the body, you tell them what they need to know, why they came there. And then finally, this is where we kind of disagree the most, is the tell them what you told them. My feeling is if you told them in the body in a way that was interesting, captivating, relatable, intriguing, you shouldn't have to tell them what you told them. Hopefully they were listening. So use that time for something more interesting, and that's what I call the capper. Ending with another story or set of ideas, get them thinking about where they're going to apply this. How do we go forward from here? Or another story that shows how using this information took someone, maybe yourself, in a better direction. So you leave them on a thought of, yes, I want to go out and apply this. Far more interesting than just reviewing what you said. And so those put together make for a really nice body for a speech.
Well, good. We are definitely in agreement, and I also do teach the 3 tell-ems, and I think it's a great place to start sometimes. And as you said, I think you can make it more interesting. So we're definitely on the same page. Cool. And we're there for sure. So let's talk about the capture just for a moment, because I think one of the hardest parts of a speech or a presentation, I use those 2 terms interchangeably, is the opening. And Absolutely. It is the point or the part where it seems like people are the most nervous. I hear it all the time. If I can just get through the first couple minutes, I'll be okay. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I teach is that, well, if you have a great opening, you're going to start to relax. If you know that opening is just solid and you're going to get the reaction you want, you're going to relax more.
And you're assuming they have an opening, because sometimes people think, what do you mean my opening? I just start telling about my stuff. I'm like, okay, I know what this session is going to be about. It's going to be about creating an opening.
Yes. A lot of people have the opening. Can someone get the lights?
Is this mic on? That's another
right. And the closing, again, is, can somebody get the lights again? Okay. So let's talk about some better ways to capture their attention. You mentioned stories. Are there other ways that you can capture their attention as well?
There are. It's the one that I tend to use because I don't know anyone who gets bored hearing stories and there's no end to them. If for some reason, though, maybe for time purposes or for whatever reason, you're saying, I really don't want to start with a story, another place to start perhaps could be a question, and then leave just you don't want to leave a long pause, but enough of a pause so that it sinks in to get people thinking, that is interesting. Okay, let's see what he has to say about that. So that's one thing you could do to try and create a capture in a different way. I'd have to brainstorm to come up with more other ways because
that's fine.
I don't ever try and steer people away from story. It's just so effective.
And then at the close with the capper, as you call it, what are just some words that you might use? Can you share anything there so that our listeners might just jot down a couple words that might be good to start them out there?
I'm not searching by words.
As far as what might you say? Do you use words like in conclusion or summary? What do you do there when you know you're reaching the end? Is there any suggestion there?
There's a couple of ways to do it. One of the ways is to have, if you're using PowerPoint, is to have some slide that looks like it's got finality to it. So as you start the story, they get a sense of it. I actually have a slide in one of my presentations that says the final story on, and so people know, okay, the ending is coming here. And then I just go into my speech story. But yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying something like, so as we head into the conclusion, here's something I want you to think about, da-da-da-da-da. Or as we wrap things up, I'd like to share a story about. You can even tell people you're sharing a story. You don't have to, but I don't think there's any harm in that. I generally don't. I usually just start telling another story, and then I make sure it has a feeling by the time I'm done of being an ending, so they know that it is.
Great. So there's some way that you let them know, because I've sometimes seen presentations that just kind of ended and people were like, oh, it's over. So, some of the words you use are great. Good transitions there.
It's also in a little bit of a pacing. You slow down in the very end. You make sure, if you can, you end with a final thought so it feels like a wrapper. And, of course, it never hurts to say thank you very much or something like that so that they know that you're done.
Well, Milo, you bring up a good point there, so I want to get your opinion on that. I have heard for 20-odd years that I've been teaching presentation skills like you, some people say never close a speech by saying thank you. Some people say always say thank you, and then we have people obviously in the middle there. What's your opinion on that?
My feeling is do it and do it very briefly, and especially at the end. I'll come back to that for a second, but I don't think there's anything wrong as long as you've left them with something really solid without just saying afterwards, thank you very much. I mean, it's not like, oh, no, he went on for a minute about thanking us and he lost the power. I don't think that loses the power. Where I don't want to see the thanking, this is what drives me crazy, is the first minute and a half.
Right.
It becomes, there's your chance to capture them. All eyes are on you. It becomes, ladies and gentlemen, the people of the board, I really want to, you know how you show them you appreciate them? By doing a good job. Yeah. And then for the people who tell me I just cannot bring myself to not do it, then I sneak in a little thanks as we go from the transition into the body. But never in that opening moment. That's your chance to capture their attention. Don't waste it with thank yous.
Great advice. Totally love it. Okay. One of the many top 10 lists that you have in your book, and we'll talk about all these numerous top 10 lists that you have, but one of the many warns against several things that people can do that might distract their audience from their message. Can you share a few of these things that we might do that distract, that we shouldn't do?
Right, and there's a lot of different ways. There's distracting, and then there's outright alienating them, too, so which definitely distracts them. So it goes both ways. A very simple one that can be a distraction situation is not having things really right in your PowerPoint. If there's any typos or things that you push the button and it doesn't go where you're going to, make sure you really know that your PowerPoint looks sharp. In fact, I purposely misspell a word in one of my PowerPoints when I'm doing the keynote that I give about public speaking skills. And then I say, now, how many of you, for instance, did I lose for about 5 to 10 seconds when you saw that word was misspelled? And then I push the button and it crosses out the word and spells it right. And I get laughter through the room and there's nodding because I know people got caught up in looking at the misspelling. So that's one thing. Make sure your PowerPoint really looks good. Props can be distracting. I'm not saying not to use them, but plan them. If you're talking about one thing, hold it for an appropriate amount of time. But if you're holding up, I'm just going to try and think of something, a bottle of pills, because you're talking about a story where you couldn't open the bottle of pills, for instance. Put the pills down when you're past that part of the story. I've seen people wave that bottle of pills around like it was some sort of a pointer for long after it wasn't useful. Or they're trying to hold too many things at once, and they end up in this situation where they're awkwardly juggling things, including a microphone half the time. So let them have their place and then get rid of them. Put them inside the lectern, get them off on a table, or don't use props if you feel it's going to distract you. It's not really necessary. Another place you can distract people is clothing, and it tends to be more for the women because men's clothing is simpler. But the outfit that might get you compliments, that you might look fantastic in, and might be even great for that night out at the clubs after the presentation, could be full of things that are going to draw people's eyes away from your message and to your clothing, whether it's a lot of jewelry, whether it's the color of your lipstick, what you've done with your hair. Again, it might look great, but people aren't there to see you. They're there to get your message. So the simpler you can keep your outfit, as long as it looks the right level of professionalism, the better off you are. And for men, it's not that far off. I mean, it's the same situation. Make sure that you're looking neat. Make sure that you're looking appropriate, but don't try and dress to impress that much.
Great point. So let me ask you a question about that, the attire. So if you're speaking to a group that is in what is known as business casual, for men, it's often a pair of khaki pants and some type of polo shirt, and for women, I'll let the women talk about that. I can't address it. So,
and they have it tougher. There's no clear pattern. They do have it tougher.
Yeah. So what does the speaker wear if they're internal or external to the organization? Do they dress like the audience? Do they wear a suit and tie? Is that going to put them on a different level and disconnect? What's your thought there?
It really varies, and it varies by you, it varies by your topic, and it varies by where you're speaking and for what kind of company. And I'll kind of address that overall. I'll give an extreme example, though. There is a speaker, I'm not going to say his name, even though I think it probably would be okay, who wears a uniform, a worker's uniform, and he does that no matter what his audience is. And
yes, we'll leave his name out.
Yeah, he's an amazing speaker. I mean, I'm not putting him down in any way, but he actually ties it in and makes it really work for him. It ends up becoming a very powerful thing that you're going to give him his attention, even though he's dressed like he's going to fix your car.
Right.
And on the other end of the spectrum, there's people who, their suits, there's no way they aren't tailored by the right people with the right names. And they're going to wear that no matter who they speak to, and that fits their image. And if you're talking about overhauling business and business change and in that kind of setting, and your audience is all CEOs, there might be a reason to say, doesn't matter if they're business casual, you're going to show up as that kind of business person. But I tend to believe, and again, your message may be a factor in it, that dressing about as well as the best-dressed people in the room is to your advantage, maybe only slightly better. If you're speaking to a business casual audience and you're a man, you might want to throw on that sports jacket over a shirt and tie, or maybe not even a shirt and tie, maybe just a nice shirt. For me, I was doing the full suit. The whole thing, getting up there and speaking, and a branding expert came up to me and she said, "You've got to stop it, Milo, with the suit. Yeah. It's not you." And I said, "What do you mean? I'm a professional speaker." She goes, "You're getting up there and talking about fun. You're leading your crowds in improvisation. You're creating this great energy, and the suit is a complete disconnect from that." So we looked at a variety of different options. What we came up with is I now wear really bright long-sleeve shirts, solid color, with white suspenders. And that's my look, no matter what the audience is, unless there's that rare occasion where I feel like I need to throw a jacket over it as well. I have a black jacket that I'll wear with it. But it's enough to say I took you seriously enough to dress on purpose, give some real thought into it, but not look like I'm off to a wedding and you're sitting there in a T-shirt and I'm in a suit. I'm trying to relate to you. Great. So it does vary.
Okay. Well, great. So it sounds like the rule of thumb is dress at least as well as the best-dressed person in the audience. Make sure you give it some thought, and make sure it makes sense with your message. So,
and in order to find out what that's going to be, because you walk in not knowing, it's one of the questions I'll ask event planners up front is, what do you think the manner or dress will be?
Good.
And nowadays you hear business casual more often than not, but every once in a while you say they'll be dressing appropriately for a business meeting. There will be people in suits. Or the other end of the spectrum, we're going to be doing a whole team building thing that day. You'll probably have people in shorts and some flip-flops.
Right.
Well, I know that, and I can adjust to that.
Yeah, and everybody's idea of business casual is different. When I worked for IBM in the early 80s, business casual, I was told, was on Friday, and I didn't have to wear my vest. All right, let's go on to the next question.
Sure.
Besides distracting your audience, you also write about 10 ways you could potentially alienate, as you said before, really alienate your audience, which is something we absolutely don't want to do. So can you tell us a few things that we might do inadvertently that would really tick our audience off?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways, and some of it may seem like common sense, and yet sometimes it's kind of like a wake-up call, like I never would have thought of it that way. One of the places that you can do it is with ethnicity. There's a slide I use in one of my programs early on to prove this point. It's a perfectly good picture that shows two people of Asian descent, but it's the first time I'm showing any people in it. And there wasn't any reason it needed to be two Asian people. It happened to be two people who looked like they were in a legal situation, and I was talking about lawyers at that point in time. But what I point out after the fact is it could have, for some people in the audience, whether they were Asian or not, raised the question of, I wonder why he chose two Asian people. Was he trying to say something about Asian people? Was it a positive thing? Was it a negative thing? It's neither. It's a picture that shows two lawyers. But the fact that it did single out one ethnicity could be a potential distraction and maybe in some way could be taken offensively. So what would be better would be to use a mixture, at least the first time I had a photo, and hopefully include someone of my ethnicity and then maybe one or two others, and then mix them up throughout the program through there. There's also the wording that comes with ethnicity. It may be that I know perfectly well the two people in that picture, that photo was taken in Korea, and that they are not the word that we are being trained more and more to use, Asian Americans. Well, no, they're not. The picture was taken in Korea. But in the context that I was speaking, no one in the audience would know that. So it probably would have been wise to use the phrase Asian American because that's a term that's better liked in general. Now, if I was talking about a trip I took to Korea, then I would use the word Asian. And that becomes a little bit tricky because some words are liked better than others. Another one that sort of walks that line is African American. That's the word that I was told I was always supposed to say until I went to a conference where I watched a panel of people that I would have called African Americans debate whether they liked the word African American or black better. Right. And finally I raised my hand and said, as a white guy, if you can't agree, what am I supposed to do? And what was really interesting, as much as they disagreed, they all agreed with the answer to that. They said use the word African American the first time or two, and then use the word black interchanging with it. Because what that does is by using African American first, it shows that you know what word is generally preferred, but by alternating, you also show a respect for the fact that there are people in the community, for various reasons I won't get into, who actually do prefer the word black. Okay, so there's a few cases like that with ethnicity. Let's get past that. There's language. I hope that nobody out there would be crazy enough to be dropping the F-bomb in the middle of a speech you were giving to a corporate presentation. But the D word, the H word, the M word, words like that can offend people that you didn't expect to. There's no M word.
I don't even know what these words stand for. Not that you have
I made
to
up the
say
M
them.
word. I just wanted to see if you were listening.
No.
No, but it doesn't take much. There was a youth group that I used the word rats with, and they all went, I'm like,
rats?
Rats, R-A-T-S. I said, you can't say rats. They went, you said it again. So all I could do was apologize and said, I didn't know we weren't allowed to say that word. I won't say it again. It's a word that when I went to school we were allowed to say. I think it was they were trying to keep the kids from just yelling expletives, but I don't know. For me, I'd want my kid to say rats so they didn't say anything else. But that's an extreme example. But anything that you wouldn't want to say in front of your leader of your house of worship or a 6-year-old or your grandmother, don't try and do it for emphasis. There's other words you can use for emphasis.
So a good rule of thumb would be, if in doubt, leave it out.
Absolutely. And that goes for the SAT words, too. Don't try and impress people by how many big words you can use that look like you use a thesaurus to come up with them. You can really mess up your message by trying to use the big words. Speak to people in a way that they're going to get your message, and that's what's going to make you look impressive. So those
now, Milo, since we have an international audience, SATs are a scholastic achievement test. Just want to define that for our group. Speaking about language, sometimes we want to make sure that our language is clear to everybody. And tell me a little bit more.
Okay, and that's a good example of another place where I could have just alienated some of your listeners.
Exactly.
It's easy to do because we forget sometimes what is so ethnocentric to ourselves. I gave a speech where I was talking for quite a while, and I gave a whole section of the speech where I kept referring to Gloria Steinem over and over again, a reference that to me is universal. It's not, but I'd forgotten that, and this lovely lady came up to me afterwards with an accent I won't try and impersonate, but she said to me afterwards, "That was so interesting. Can you now tell me who Gloria Steinem is?" And I realized that someone who had fought for women's rights in the 70s here in the United States is somewhat iconic to us, but means nothing to someone from Norway.
Sure. So, and one other thing, Milo, while we're on this, that I have found, if you use language, not necessarily offensive language, but language that's just unclear or not defined for some listeners, then they're going to spend the next at least several seconds, if not minutes, trying to figure that out and dwelling on it, and you've already moved on to your next point, so they're not with you any longer.
There's a story in the other book that I don't think I've ever told you this story, David. I went to a service at a temple many, many years ago, and the rabbi told this story that went on and on. By the time we got to the end of it, nobody cared what the punchline to this joke was going to be. We were actually looking forward to the prayers just to end this joke. And after going on and on, finally he gets to the punchline, and he says, and the rabbi's wife says, "De zolft zich shemen in weiten Holzerein." And like 3 old men around the temple laughed, and then he went on with the prayers. Well, we didn't care to hear the punchline anymore, but once we heard it and didn't know what it meant, nobody listened to any of the prayers for the next 10 minutes as everybody tried to find out, what does that mean? He completely misread his audience, most of whom were 50 years younger than him, and didn't make his point and distracted us completely. So he didn't relate to his audience. And that's what it is. Who is your audience? How are they going to relate to you is a very good bottom line. If you're talking to a younger group, talk with younger words. Talk with younger references. And that's another one is references. I made a reference to Marlo Thomas. Completely American audience. No reason to think there would be a cultural difference until a 25-year-old came up to me and said, "Who's that?"
Sure.
I said, "That girl." He said, "What girl?" I mean, he didn't even know what that girl was. And for those of you from other countries, it was a really bad sitcom television show back in the late 60s.
All right, so know your audience and be careful about what you say. Think twice.
Sure.
Let me move on to another question, Milo.
Okay.
We have focused a lot on what we shouldn't do and shouldn't say, but not a lot yet on delivery. And I think a lot of the fear comes from delivery. So tell me now and tell our listeners, what do we need to know about really making sure that we deliver a good speech?
There's a lot of different things. How do you attack a question like that? There's because different people's issues are different, and that's one of the things I like about coaching as compared to giving classes when I have the opportunity. For some people, it's about rehearsal. They just need to get it down. For some people, it's about writing more interesting material. So it's going to vary across the board what things are worth or specifically. But I think one of the areas that everybody can improve on, even the professionals, is using vocal variety more effectively, because it's something that universally we want to enjoy listening to someone speak and the way they speak and the drama of how they speak. And if you're not mixing up what you say to make it sound interesting, you're losing so much of the music of the words.
Now, you've got something that you actually trademarked, a technique called the 7 variants of vocal variety.
Right.
So tell us why 7 and what is this?
Why 7 was because when I got to 7, I felt like that's enough for people to take on. There wasn't any super reason why it was 7, but it was originally 5, basically, and I came up with 2 more, and I said, okay, I can't not include those. So let's kind of go through that. And the reason I came up with the list at all was we're always told use more vocal variety. I was told that back in Toastmasters. I heard people be told that. But what is it? If you're going to do it, what are the parts? So I wanted to break it down for my clients. So the first one, quite simply, is volume. It's very simple. Even if you're speaking in a monotone, you can speak in a monotone louder or quieter. So volume is a very easy one to vary. The next one is pitch. Sometimes going a little bit higher makes sense, like right there. And then there's a time when you're making a point to bring down the pitch. So go up and down with your pitch. The third one is speed. It might make total sense to slow down for just a second, and then speed up because you have something to explain, but then go back to the slower point. So in that sentence, for instance, I sped up in the middle and returned to the slow speed once I had gotten that parenthetical part out in the middle. So
and before you go to the next one, for those people who are listening today, you are listening over the internet or through a download, or the phone for some of you dialing in live, which is limited just to voice. And many of our clients are doing webcasts today where they're not there in person with the listener, and they almost only have the voice to depend on. So this is really key and good information. So let's go on to the next one.
Sure, and using your face effectively even when they can't hear you is going to help bringing those things out. We can come back to that if you want.
Okay,
so we've talked about volume, pitch, and speed. The fourth one is break points, because sometimes when you get to that special moment, letting it sink in is what's going to work. Knowing just where you want to stop for a second, here and there. And a lot of people don't do that. That's a place where I'll just draw lines in people's text. They stop there for a second. That's a really key point, and you're blowing through it so quickly. Let people absorb it. And it's not just speaking slower. It's really outright stopping. The problem is that people are afraid to stop because they think people will go, "What's the matter? Why did he stop?"
Or they'll leave.
Or that it'll feel endless. Sure, it feels like endless to you. It's not endless to them. There was a group of people who stopped and looked up from their writing because I paused recently. That was okay. I had their full attention. That was nice to get their attention that way. Fifth one is holdings, because every once in a while you really want to hold a thought. So you can take a vowel sound. There's a few consonants that work. It's usually the vowels, and just hold it a little bit longer like that. You wouldn't want to do too many in the same sentence, or you'd sound strange, but here and there it can be effective. The sixth one is emotion, because if you're trying to make a point, and it really bugs me sometimes when I don't get the point across the way I meant to. See, throwing in the emotion there, it could be a set if you hit a spot, or it could be something you just end up laughing your way through, because it's showing that point had kind of a happy, upbeat feeling when you thought of it. So vary your emotion a little bit, as long as you don't start to come across as schizophrenic in the process. And the last one is sort of a catch-all. It's intonation. Because you might have a time, especially if you're quoting someone, where you want to give your voice just a different sound. So you might get a little more nasal. You might sound a little bit different, get a little more guttural in your throat. Whatever it is, it could be adding an accent, something to just make your voice different that isn't just a normal variation of how you would normally speak like the first six are.
Yeah. So and you might even use that to imitate a client or the cashier that you were telling the story about, just to bring it to life.
Absolutely. There's one story I tell where I give someone an accent, and the person actually didn't have an accent. And I don't feel like I'm lying to the audience. I'm just making it much more clear when I'm telling the story that it's not me speaking now, it's the other person.
Sure.
So I think it adds a lot more, just a sweetness to it, to have that change going on. And even if it's not an accent.
We don't call it lying, we call it poetic license. Right?
Right. And the words are still fairly true. It's just a question of giving it a little more flavor.
It's the essence of the story that is there. That's intact. So Milo, it's the morning of my speech that I'm giving at lunchtime. What should I do that day?
Well, what most people will do is go through their regular work day, suddenly realize, it's 11:15, rush out the door, and try and get there. So the first thing is leave yourself plenty of time. I mean, you don't want to have anything that can get in your way. And there are so many little things that could go wrong and things like that. But beyond just generally being on time and being friendly when you get there and getting to meet the people, you also want to have a chance to actually warm up. And most people don't do that. Sometimes the warm-ups I do with my clients are actually more important than the stuff I do in their speeches, because they start out good. Like anything else, like exercise, you can go for a run. If you do it from cold, not only could you potentially hurt yourself, but eventually your body will warm up. Do you want it to be in the last mile, or do you want to be before the first mile? And that's the same thing that's happening with our speaking. We are going to warm up in front of our audience. So if you want to be warmed up for those last 5 minutes, don't warm up at home. I don't think that's when I want to be warmed up. So there's 4 places I say to warm yourself up. You want to warm up your body, your face, your voice, and your mind. And when all 4 of those are at their best, you're going to have the opportunity to really shine from the first few seconds you're on stage.
And what does that look like? What are some of the things we would actually do?
Okay, well, let's start with your body, because that's kind of the one people relate to the easiest. I'll do shoulder rolls. I'll do some stretches. I'll see if I could be a little bit aerobic earlier in the day, not to exhaust myself, but just to get some blood moving. I tend to have lower back stuff, so I'll do some twists, just so that I feel like if I'm gesturing, it's not a forced movement because I've already done it. I'm big on talking in terms of pendulums. If we can push ourselves not in front of the audience to a 10 on a scale, then it won't be so hard to get to a 7 when we're trying to do it naturally. Whereas if we hadn't warmed up, pushing might get us to a 6 and it'll look pushed. So warming up our bodies is just a very natural thing to do in any way that you're used to doing it. Another thing that people don't usually do, though, is warm up their faces. I gave a speech. I was one of 10 speakers one day, and someone came over to me after she was a coach and said, "You did facial warm-ups before you went on stage." I said, "No, I don't know what facial warm-ups are." She said, "You did something. What did you do in the 5 or 10 minutes before you went on stage?" And I said, "I went back into the green room backstage, and there was a mirror there, and I just gave my speech as fast as I could in front of the mirror to make sure I had all the words down." And she goes, "And that must have woken up your face because you were trying to be so energetic in front of the mirror going so fast." And so that's when I realized how important that was, and I've seen it in others. And there's a few exercises you can do. One of them, ones that I teach, is called the chew. I tell people to imagine they're unwrapping a piece of big bubble gum, like a big, soft, chewy kind, and put that in their mouth, and unwrap it and put it in, so your mouth is full of the bubble gum, and then try and chew it and push it all over your mouth and move your mouth. So what you're doing in the process is you're really stretching your mouth and your cheeks and your gums, everything out, so that your face and your mouth don't have to push themselves when you're doing it in front of the audience.
Yeah, and just let me interject for a second. One of the important reasons for doing this is it helps prevent you from becoming what they call tongue-tied when you're up before the group and you just can't say the right word or you trip over your words. These exercises, as silly as they may sound and as silly as they may look, absolutely help. And as a professional speaker myself, I could tell you the times that I didn't do it are the times I've regretted.
And as far as them looking silly, you can do so many of these in the car on the way there or at home. I don't recommend doing them sitting at your table waiting for them to call you up because people might notice.
Right.
So we've talked about a couple of things you can do. Oh, another one is big face. Before I pass face, what I'll do is I'll tell my clients to squeeze their faces really, really small, like every part of their face is trying to get to the tip of their nose, and try and talk that way. And they ask me how that felt, and I say it feels awkward and tiny and not projectile. And then I'll say, great, now open your eyes as big and your mouth as big as you possibly can. And it's further than you would ever want to do in front of an audience. But by practicing with what is a big face with big eyes, I bet you can hear the difference in my voice while I'm doing it, even though you can't see how huge my face looks right now. And then when you come back from that, you're already a little bigger than you were. So that's a great warm-up for your face. Then we get to your voice. One of the things I recommend there is doing some tongue twisters. I have a list on my website of every consonant and the common consonant blends like SH and CH. Once you get through doing it the hard play through the tongue twisters, anything you say on stage that has a little bit of alliteration in it is going to be easier by comparison. And then there's some other vocal warm-ups to make sure you hit all the different combinations that you're likely to say. Get through the tough stuff in warm-ups, your stage time is going to feel easier. Right. And for the last one was your mind. I'll do that one real quickly. If I can, I'll do a crossword puzzle or a Sudoku or something like that in the morning so that I feel like I'm feeling sharp before getting out and trying to be sharp in front of an audience. So those are 4 things to warm up.
Good stuff. Good points. I do some community theater. We do all of the things you just listed because they work, and we wouldn't do them if they didn't. So please heed this. Again, as silly as it might sound, it's just absolutely vital to doing a real first-class job, which is what we're after. So, okay, Milo, we've warmed up, we've stepped up to the platform, and we've got 1 hour to give our presentation. And I know one of the ways to surely alienate your audience is to exceed that hour, especially if there's another speaker or if they're going to lunch or they got golf games or whatever's planned. It's just not right. So how do we make sure that we're up there for exactly an hour, no more? And who could ever be that sure that they have exactly an hour of material? You've got a secret. Share it with us.
I've got some secrets, but I got to tell you, it's the thing I stress about probably more than anything else is making sure material, especially if it's the first time I've given it, you get a sense over time of how long things take. But it's very nerve-wracking to try and make sure it's going to be the time you think it is. So one thing right off the bat that I don't even think we've discussed before is rehearse in time. It's never going to be quite that, but at least you'll have an idea. I ran a story for a presentation I'm giving on the 5th, and after I was done and I looked at the timer, I was shocked that it was a 10-minute thing that I had done. I would have guessed it for 6 or 7, so that was really good for me to be aware of. Might it end up longer as I get laughter in right places? Sure, but it gave me a guideline. But you never want to have to try and plan it down to the minute like that. So here's a few ways that you can pace yourself and have places that'll take up the slack. One of them is Q&A. Plan to have Q&A if you like doing Q&A, and you can always allow for more questions. You can always cut Q&A if you realize you're running a little late. Maybe just take one question, have some pre-prepared questions you've collected, and use more of them. That's an easy way to stretch or cut. Another one is story length, and I'm surprised how many speakers don't use this one as effectively as they could to end on time. There's a story I really like to end on, and it's about a 4.5-minute story, and to get the full laughter and appreciation out of it, that's how long it takes. But if I'm running late, I know I have practiced it in a version that I can get to the point of that slide in 35 seconds if I need to. And the audience doesn't know that they missed out on a really good story with a lot of wonderful nuances and laughter in it because they never heard it before. I got to my point. I reached my ending. So have different length versions of your stories in mind that you've practiced, and then that's not such a big deal to take into account. What's another one we could use? Interactive exercises. Have things that you get the audience to do with you so that you can do more or less of those activities, and suddenly you can gain back or use an extra 5 minutes with those activities. Referrals. Something that you planned on explaining and maybe spending 5 or 10 minutes on. If you've got to make up that time, let them know where they can get that information. This next section on such and such, there's a section on my website about it, or I looked in the World Book Encyclopedia. There are lots of examples there. I just wanted to touch on it for a second. Well, no, you wanted to do more than touch on it, but this is a chance to make up the time. But you have to know the referrals in advance so that you can make them if it comes to that. Homework assignments. Take something that you were going to do as an interactive exercise and tell people this is something you want them to try at home. Then instead of spending 5 minutes on them doing it, you're only spending 1 minute explaining it to them, and letting them loose with it. And finally, I like to have a bonus point, something that isn't even in my slides, so that if I'm running a little bit faster than I thought, I know I can sidetrack and tell some other story or some point that I want to share that wasn't part of my program in the first place. If you use a combination of all these, it's actually not so hard anymore to get it down to that point where on the 59th minute you're pointing back to the meeting planner and getting the applause, and she's a sighing relief because she knows that you're not going to make her look bad by running late.
Great, good stuff. And no matter whether you're a professional speaker or amateur business speaker, these are all pertinent. So now let's talk about anxiety and nerves. You've heard it before. We've all heard it that one of the top fears just seems to always be public speaking. So first of all, do you get nervous?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so do I. So you're hearing it from two people who have been speaking for many years combined.
And I don't ever want to lose that entirely, do you?
No. Well, some days, yes. Some days, yes, but no. The reality is no, I don't, because it keeps me sharp. But boy,
Absolutely.
sometimes it can be overwhelming. It's not fear at this point for me, but it is nervousness that you want to make sure that you do a great job, and there's a lot riding on it. So it makes sense that you're going to be a little uncomfortable.
Carol Burnett once said the one time she went out on stage saying, "What do I ever get nervous for? This is easy." It was the worst show she ever had. And she always had a little bit of nerves after that, and she said it was a lesson I needed to know. Anything can happen. It's worth bottling up that energy a little bit.
Yeah, there's a quote from Oscar Wilde. It says, "The anxiety is overwhelming. May it never end." But for those of you who are wishing if it would at least go down a bit, let's talk about that for a few minutes here. What are a couple tips and tricks that you use and teach that people can employ to relax their nerves a bit?
Well, I help people to see the difference between what I call the two kinds of fear. There's created fear and there's reality-based fear. Reality-based fear is the things that we know really could go wrong and that we could work on. If somebody says, I have a fear of getting up there because I really don't think my introduction section of my program is interesting, well, maybe that's completely real. I mean,
right.
So let's work on it. Let's make you like your, and then that fear abates. Maybe it's, I don't feel like my PowerPoint is organized very well, and it makes me nervous that people are going to see it feels disorganized. Then let's work on it. And what I find is that a lot of times when people tell me, I'm just scared, when they can define it, it's all things we can work on. So instead of focusing on dealing with the fear, I deal with making them feel better about how they're performing. So don't rush into things. Take your time. Really work on it. Have fun with putting visuals into your PowerPoints. Be playful. So by the time you get there, it's something you're looking forward to sharing with them. That takes a lot out of it. And then there are things that are just created fear. We create things. What if I fall off the stage? Are you going to? No, but you can stress about them if you want to. But at least when we take the reality-based fears and deal with them, the creative fear tends to die down because the whole thing just seems to fall into place. I know that sounds very pat, but it's true. When you like what you are going to sound like and you like the way it's come out in rehearsal, the creative fears start to go away. Then the day of the program, sure, there's things you could do. Breathing exercises can be actually very calming. Some people like visualization. I know someone very involved in Toastmasters, a professional speaker, who always takes 5 or 10 minutes to imagine it going well, seeing smiles on the faces of her audience. And she has this image in her head as if it's a memory now. So she just gets to live through that memory again. And it actually calms her down. So there's other things you can do like that. But mostly doing what you can to be as good as you can will kill a lot of the fear.
Great. All right. Well, we are talking with Milo Shapiro, and we are just about out of time, Milo. So we've obviously just scratched the surface of this topic that we could probably talk about for days on end, especially the two of us. So first of all, let me tell our listeners that tell them a little bit about your book, Milo, and not just to promote it, but it really is a very unique book with some great information. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds here because we're nearing the end of our call. Just tell people what this is.
Sure. I thought all the books that I was finding in the major stores were kind of dull, so I wanted to write a book that was fun on this topic. So Public Speaking, Get A's, Not Z's, is all done with top 10 lists. So that makes it really fun, and you can read a top 10 list in 5 minutes probably, even though the book has some substance in terms of its thickness. And I did it in reverse in some cases. The top 10 ways, like you said, to alienate your audience, or the top 10 ways to blow it with your handouts. And I put in a lot of stories of other people and myself who've really made these mistakes so you can learn from someone else's mistake and not make these mistakes in the future. So I think it's fun. It's full of stories. So it's not just a lot of do this, don't do that.
Excellent. And the title of the book one more time. Public
Speaking, Get A's, Not Z's.
Okay, and you'll find a link on our website at teambuilding123 or davidgreenberg.com. And if you're interested in having Milo do some coaching with you or your group, you can contact us at davidgreenberg.com or call us directly. Phone number 404-518-7777. That is in the United States. Again, 404-518-7777. So let me thank you, Milo, for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today.
I appreciate being on.
And I want to thank our teleseminar participants for joining us. Also, be sure to attend our next teleseminar where we'll cover even more great ideas from other leading experts. Until we meet again, this is David Greenberg wishing you great success. Bye-bye, everyone.